Hi there, I'm Chris, and I want to welcome you to my home studio. This video is a deep dive into my song Dust Storm, and I really wanted to spotlight the awesome guitar solo that my friend Al Fairweather contributed to the track. So, if you haven't had a chance to watch the playthrough video for Dust Storm, here's a link to the video. I've also included the link in the video description below. But before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. Some of what I'll be talking about involves subconscious decisions. In other words, you're not necessarily going to be actively thinking about every one of these things when you're songwriting. But our minds do a lot of behind-the-scenes work for us, and I'm just trying to bring some of that to the foreground. Also, this is really my process, so if your songwriting methodology is literally nothing like mine, there's nothing wrong with that. My goal in dissecting my process is to hopefully give you some new techniques for your songwriting bag of tricks. So, let's dive in. Like a lot of my music, Dust Storm was a convergence of two things. The first is just my pool of musical ideas that I come up with during my usual practicing and noodling around. But the second is more of a deliberate creation of sonic imagery for the specific story that I want to tell. So, here's the story behind Dust Storm. In the summer of 2018, I spent a week in Phoenix, Arizona, and I got to experience my first real taste of desert dust storms. The experience was a little scary, but mostly just fascinating. The storms came through the city 3 or 4 of the nights that I was there, but thankfully they all happened late in the evening after I had already settled down in my hotel room for the night. They would seemingly occur out of nowhere, and the wind and rain would come in almost as if someone had just flipped a switch. The conditions went quickly from the gentle pitter-patter of rain on my hotel window to the sound of just globs of mud getting whipped against the window, even all the way up on the 10th floor where I was staying. I can really only describe it as a cacophonous symphony of howling wind with a constant drum roll of mud droplets hitting the window, punctuated by cracks of thunder from nearby lightning strikes. Kind of poetic, huh? Then, as suddenly as it all came on, it was over just as quickly. So how do you take that experience and turn it into a song, especially a song with no words? Well, the key is to tap into the listener's emotions. So that means first taking inventory of how the experience made me feel as the storyteller. For me, this experience was visceral, uneasy, foreign, maybe even violent, yet it was simultaneously captivating and intriguing. So how do you get the listener to experience these things via music alone? Well, emotions are tricky, but in my opinion, if you can convey even just 1 or 2 emotions with a song, you're doing a great job as a composer. So rather than trying to nail down a laundry list of 5 or 6 complex emotions, my goal with any song, really, is to nail one emotion solidly. And if I can add any additional subtle nuance, that's just extra credit. So for Dust Storm, I decided to focus on the visceral aspect of my experience. And I find that the bass guitar is a visceral instrument by its very nature. Its role in any given song is dual-pronged. It's responsible for both the harmonic foundation of the song, as well as the rhythmic pulse of the song, or what we call the groove. From a purely physical perspective, we often feel bass as much as we hear it, much more so than treble frequencies. The lower frequencies resonate and vibrate in a tangible and palpable way, which is especially apparent if you've ever been to a loud concert, or even if you've driven next to a car with an especially boomy and loud car stereo. So with that in mind, I started the song with bass guitar, and I maintained that strong, punchy bass throughout the song. That initial bass riff is also very syncopated, which means that the accent pattern of the notes doesn't fall evenly on the pulse of the beat. Syncopation itself can contribute to a feeling of uneasiness, which is another aspect I was trying to convey with the song as well. The bass and also the rhythm guitars in this song are tuned to drop D, and that means I took the low E string and I tuned it down a whole step to D, and this adds just a little extra heaviness to the sound too. So let's give that a listen. Let's move on to the clean guitar parts that come in along with the drums. I won't focus too much on the drums in this analysis, mostly because I'm not really a drummer. But, that said, I used Logic Pro's drummer feature, and that feature could easily be a topic for a series of videos. Let me know in the comments if you think that'd be a topic that you'd be interested in. So, on to the guitar part. Now, this part involves a little bit of music theory, but I'll try to keep it digestible. Like I mentioned, one of my goals with this song was to convey that visceral, uncomfortable, foreign feeling of experiencing something potentially dangerous from literally a front row seat. If you've written any music at all, you've likely used major or minor keys. Here's what a major scale sounds like. And here's what a minor scale sounds like. Pretty familiar sounds, right? These are very common and very powerful musical tools that have been used in countless pieces of music for hundreds of years. These keys or scales are fundamental building blocks of pretty much all the music we've listened to all of our lives. Because these musical foundations are so pervasive, we as listeners have developed an unconscious level of anticipation and expectation when we hear these. So a great way to make a listener uneasy is to simply not use these traditional major and minor sounds. Let's take a listen to the guitar chords from the intro to the song. This is a simple 4-chord progression that uses simple dyads, or 2-note chords, and it goes like this. Kind of weird, right? If you're thinking in terms of major or minor, you would be right to think that there's no way all of these weird chords could fit into a single key. So how can we use these chords and still be melodic without having to change keys every time we change chords? Well, first we have to figure out what the chord tones are, and then once we have that, we can see if there's some sort of scale that will fit these weird chords. Let's list out each of the pitches that make up the 4 chords. So we've got G, D, G, C sharp, E, B, E, A sharp. Okay, so since we repeat the G and the E, we've technically got a list of 6 different pitches. And that's actually pretty awesome because most scales have 7 pitches, so that means we're just missing 1. But before we go further, let's jump back into that bass riff for just a moment. The root, or tonic, or tonal center of this riff, the note that sounds most like home bass, is E. So let's take our list of 6 chord tones and rearrange them so that they start on E because that's our tonic. So starting from E, we've got E, G, A sharp, B, C sharp, D, and back to E. So let me just play that as a scale. That's already starting to sound like something musical. So basically, we're just missing some sort of F note in order to have a full 7-note scale. And basically, we're left with 2 options, F or F sharp. And honestly, I think either one could work. On one hand, there's an F in the bass riff, so choosing F would work against what's happening in the bass. But, on the other hand, the F sharp gives us a cool exotic scale that's called Dorian Sharp 4. Let's take a really quick detour into music theory and talk about Dorian Sharp 4. Okay, I can see your eyes glazing and your palms sweating from here, but don't worry, it's not going to get too deep into the theory here. So let's start by playing our collection of chord tones, but this time we'll include that F sharp. But instead of starting on E, we're going to start on the note B. So wait a second. That doesn't sound too crazy exotic, right? In fact, you've probably heard that scale before a lot. It's called B harmonic minor. This is a very common scale, and it's been used in classical music for hundreds of years, and you can hear it all over the place in rock, jazz, fusion, and all sorts of other music. Now here's the twist. We're not interested in playing in B harmonic minor because our tonic is E. But we still want the pitches from B harmonic minor, so what do? Well, it's simple. We can definitely still use the same pitches as B harmonic minor, but all we need to do is rearrange things so that the starting point is E instead of B. Let's hear what that sounds like. There you go. That's E Dorian sharp 4. So here's your short music theory lesson. A new scale that is created by starting from a different point in a previous scale is called a mode. Dorian sharp 4 is simply a mode of the harmonic minor scale. So here's a fun fact. Dorian sharp 4 is also sometimes referred to as the Romanian minor or Ukrainian minor scale. And you know what? That's it for the hard music theory stuff. So now that we know what Dorian sharp 4 is, this is the mode that I used for the verses of the song, because it gives me all of the chord tones from that clean guitar chord progression, so for the first half of each phrase on the verses, I actively avoided that A sharp note, but then I emphasized it for the second half of each phrase. This was a way for me to use a bit of melodic ambiguity to hide that sinister-sounding augmented fourth until I've already drawn you in as a listener. For the chorus sections of the song, I switched to using the E natural minor for the melodies. I came up with the chords first, so when I was writing the melody to ride on top of these chords, my goal was to convey an epic feeling. Now, a tried and true method for getting an epic sound is to employ the use of perfect fourth and perfect fifth intervals, and so I used these several times in the chorus melody. Let's check it out. So after each chorus, I brought back that riff from the bass intro, but I also layered on some chunky hard rock sounding rhythm guitars. So after that, I do another verse and another chorus, and then comes the bridge section. While the bridge riff is a variation on the intro riff, this ascending riff is very much aligned with the beat, so not syncopated, thus helping to contribute to the relentless driving sound. And just to drive that point home, I repeated it a few times, and so by the end of it, it's just a whirlwind of sound. So let's give that a listen. Now, because this riff starts on a D power chord, I was able to use that as a convenient mechanism for transitioning into a new key, namely D minor, for the first guitar solo section. Now, this part of the song is kind of like a calm before the storm, or maybe even an eye of the storm section. Sometimes in tropical storms, more like what I'm used to, midway through a storm, conditions calm down briefly right before going back to maximum intensity again. Okay, even though that's not really how a dust storm works, well, I'm the storyteller, so I get to do what I want, right? Okay, anyway, so in this halftime section, I constructed a lush pad of ambient guitar sounds to serve up as a backdrop for the more simple arpeggio that I had in the foreground. Let's give that a listen. So it's a simple progression of alternating D minor and B flat chords, and this was what I used as a backdrop for my guitar solo. Now, because of the calm backdrop, I decided to play a slow and melancholy solo, focusing a little bit more on the lush bluesy tones rather than guitar pyrotechnics. So here's my solo. And so here we are, the main event, Al's solo. So Al comes out of his corner swinging with this really difficult to execute, ascending, string-skipping, diminished lick. I'm going to play it first a little bit slowly so you can see the individual notes that are going by. Then I'm going to try and play it at full speed, but I got to warn you, this is a hard lick. A little bit faster. It's hard to play real clean. So what makes that lick especially difficult is having to both skip a string as well as having to fret the high note of each part of the diminished arpeggio with the fleshy part of your ring finger. It's just really hard. So now that diminished lick leads into a really cool part. Al goes into this two-handed tapping sequence, and what's really cool here is that the left hand stays on this little minor third interval, while the right hand doing the fretboard tapping moves between a B, an A sharp, and a C sharp. So basically what he's doing is he's blurring the lines between the tonality of a minor chord and a diminished chord. Here's what it sounds like. So that right there is the magic of the E Dorian sharp 4 mode, the ambiguity between the minor and diminished, and Al brings that right out to the forefront, right out of the gate. So the next part of Al's solo further blurs that tonality by infusing a couple of really tasty blues-sounding licks, but with a twist. So first he does this double stop lick that's very bluesy. Then he follows it with this very tasty blues-inspired Dorian sharp 4 lick. Very cool. I mean, it sounds bluesy, but it's using all the right notes from the Dorian sharp 4. So after that tasty bend, Al finishes up his solo with an interesting choice. There's typically two ways to indicate a climax of a musical phrase. Most commonly in rock music, you're going to hear a guitar solo that ends on a high note. But what Al did was just the opposite, and it's actually a lot more difficult. He ends his solo with a descent down to the lowest note on the guitar. This is certainly much less common, and it's honestly really hard to do in a way that sounds convincing. But again, with more of that quasi-blues sound, the descent down to that final E power chord totally nails it, and it's actually also the perfect setup for the final time through the chorus of the song. So here's that section. Very cool. So from the end of Al's solo, the song hits the third and final time through the chorus, and then it ends with a slightly shortened variation of that intro riff. It goes something like this. And that's the song. I hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the song and my approach to writing it. I encourage you to go give it another listen, especially to hear just how well crafted and perfectly executed Al's solo is. Now, let me know in the comments below if you want more of this type of deep analysis, or if you prefer song playthroughs, or if you want more music theory or home studio, home recording type content. It's up to you. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. And I really appreciate you sticking around to the end here. And until next time, take care, be safe, and as always, my warmest aloha.